a little of this, we know a little of that, but sometimes we hadn't quite put it all together, you know? And when you put it all together, it forms a bigger picture. So let's, without any ado, jump right on into our occulted history. Now, I'm not going to try to cover everything, but let's go back to the Big Bang. I mean, you know, they're even now questioning the Big Bang theory, all right? So we don't even know for sure that that's what happened. But what we do know is that Sumerian tablets, that this was cuneiform, etched in clay, which was then baked and turned into stone tablets, and there's about 500,000 of them still in existence, buried in the basements of museums all around the world, and only about 20% of them have been translated, and yet the ones that have been translated tell some incredible stories. They tell of the origins not only of the earth, but of the human race. And obviously they knew something, because we find out that the ancient Sumerians actually correctly identified the 9 planets, showed the reasonably accurate comparison of their sizes, and this was several thousand years before the Egyptian civilization. So the further back you go, the more there was knowledge. It also depicts Uranus and Neptune, and Uranus was not discovered until 1781, and Neptune 1846, and Pluto not until 1930. Of course, poor old Pluto now, he's been relegated down to some kind of semi-planet. They don't consider him a planet. I guess he's just back to being Mickey Mouse's dog. But the story goes that there was a planet called Tiamat, a giant watery planet, and it was in between Mars and Jupiter. And at some time in the long distant past, there was a war in the heavens, which can be translated one of 2 different ways, either as a genuine fighting war that took place probably in more recent times, or as an allegory as to what had happened millions of years ago, which was a rogue planet called Nibiru, known as the planet of the crossing, which goes in an elliptical orbit around our solar system. Comes through an estimated every 3,600 years, and when it comes through, it's dragging along moons and asteroids and meteors. And by the way, y'all aware that we just got hit with some meteors here in the last couple of days? You know about Russia, you know about Cuba, you know about San Francisco. Okay, yeah, it may be starting. And some people claim this is, of course, NASA says, oh, well, they're not connected. You know, oh, okay. And we know this how. But others say this is Nibiru that is approaching our solar system, is pushing its way, its magnetic field is pushing its way through the Oort cloud, which is the asteroids outside our solar system, and that it's pushing things and they're speeding around. And we also know that we just got missed by an asteroid, right? Everybody knows that. All right, all the way back into the 80s, I was picking up stories and sticking them in my files about scientists that were saying they had discovered a 10th planet, okay, in the solar system. But here's one from last year, May. A yet undiscovered planet may be orbiting at the outer fringes of the solar system, according to new research. So what I'm telling you is not just fairy tales. So it could be that those ancient Sumerians knew what they were talking about. So the idea is that Nibiru swings through on one of its 3,600-year orbits, dragging along some moons and other things, and one of them smashes into Tiamat. Okay, half of Tiamat is pulverized but remains in its orbit, and this is what we now know as the Asteroid Belt. I don't think that should be any big surprise to anybody. I know when I was in junior high school and was learning about the Asteroid Belt, my first thought was, well, God, that's a planet that blew up or something, you know, and it's just still there in the same orbit. But what you may not have heard is that the other half of Tiamat was knocked out of the orbit past Mars and went into orbit between Mars and Mercury, and over millions of years coalesced into the Earth. So that's where the Earth came from, and the moon was one of these moons that accompanied Nibiru and became our satellite. This is a pretty far out theory, and yet it answers a lot of questions about where the comets came from, these dirty balls of ice that are flying around all everywhere. Well, they're pieces of Tiamat that are still there. Where'd all the asteroids, where'd the asteroid belt come from? It answers all of that. So that once the Earth settled in and settled in, and of course, well, where would it have, where was the spot on the Earth that might have been broken off from Tiamat? Well, the Pacific Ocean. Because here's a huge, about half the Earth, where there's no landmass. So again, it all makes sense. And this is what was written down in the ancient Sumerian tablets. So then we look around at other things going on in our solar system, and it even gets stranger. Carl Sagan says that the Phobos, one of the two moons of Mars, exhibits characteristics indicating it might be hollow, and that a natural object cannot be hollow. So in other words, it may be some kind of, I started to say man-made, but it wasn't us. But it was made by intelligent design. And that's not the only one. We've got Iapetus. This is the one that really knocks me out. It's one of the moons of Jupiter. And look, it's got this mountain ridge that just goes right around the equator. Now, I've seen lots of mountain ridges. I've flown over the Alps and the Himalayas, and you got mountains, but they never go in a straight line. This thing, look at this. It's a ridge that goes around there. It reminds me of the wall on King Kong Island, you know. And then when you look at it, it's got this huge sunken area. I don't know if that's a huge crater or what. It's got this line that runs across it, and it looks just like the Death Star. And it gives indication of being hollow. So there's the theory that it's a hollowed out asteroid or a fabricated type body that was used to travel through the universe. It's also known as the Yin-Yang Moon because its configuration, when it's in part shadow and part life, it looks like the ancient Chinese Yin-Yang symbol. That's kind of interesting. And then, of course, there's questions about our own moon, and for any of you all that have seen my presentation on Alien Agenda, you know, we get into a lot about the moon, so I'm going to kind of skip on through there. Other than I will point out that in 1969, in November, when the Apollo 12 took off from the moon, the lunar module crashed back onto the surface of the moon, and NASA officials said that it reverberated like a bell for more than an hour. I've got here more than an hour. As I recall, actually, they said for like 6 hours or more, the moon was vibrating. Well, that gives evidence that it's hollow. There's other things, too, I could go into. For instance, once a month, there is a creaking that is detected on the moon. And they can't explain where that comes from, but as somebody theorized, maybe it's a loose plate. You know, and when it's at closest to the Earth, the gravitational pull can cause the plate to creak or whatever. We also know, contrary to what we were taught in school, which is the moon is an airless, dead world, there's water on the moon, there's a slight atmosphere, there's a magnetic field. It's not at all what we were taught, which is one of the main messages of my talk today, which is most of what we think we know, we don't know. Today, interestingly enough, when they try to explain where the moon came from, the prevalent theory today is the big whack theory. The idea that something struck another planetary body came in and struck another planetary body and knocked a chunk of it off to create the moon. Well, whoa, wait a minute. Is this beginning to sound like the ancient Sumerian tale? But it does explain the moon anomalies, and there are many. The best one about the moon is how to get to where it is. Isaac Asimov said it shouldn't be where it is, but it is. And what am I talking about? Well, we were taught, at least I was taught early school, that the moon broke away from the Earth. But we now know that's not true because the composition of moon rocks are not the same as Earth. So it came from somewhere else. So you got the Earth, here comes the moon traveling through space, goes past the Earth, it's picked up in the gravitational field, it's pulled back, and it's grabbed again, it's pulled back again, and over time it finally comes into orbit around the moon. Well, it should be in kind of an elliptical orbit, kind of wobbling around the moon, but it's not. It's in a stationary orbit, one side always facing the Earth and going in an almost perfect circular orbit around the Earth right at the equator. How in the world in nature does that happen? Well, it doesn't. But here's the way the thinking goes. The evidence indicates that it was parked there by intelligent design. But we know we didn't do it because it's been there all through our written history. And we all know there's no such thing as aliens. So we just won't talk about this. But yet, even the moon, we do know there's all kinds of weird things. This is called a shard. These are all NASA photographs. This is some kind of structure on the moon that's about a mile high. It's just sticking up there. What is that, an antenna? Who knows? And then we got all kinds of objects seen on the moon. Look at this thing jutting out over a crater. This thing's flying along, apparently. It's leaving some kind of trail. So there's stuff happening on the moon, and it's nothing recent. The lights have been seen moving on the moon all the way back to the time of Copernicus when they were first inventing the telescope. Structures have been seen on the moon, and then later they're not there. So what, is somebody working on the moon? Somebody got a base on the moon? Well, now today there is the theory and the idea that we may have a secret base on the moon. But we're not saying that's not true. But there's something else going on because this stuff was seen long before we ever put anybody on the moon. I particularly like this photograph. We got these tracks of some kind of round object that's just rolling along, and of course this is a slide made from a photograph that was published. But in the first-hand photograph, this is a crater over here, and the tracks, you know, you would think, well, maybe it's a big round boulder and it just rolled off. But you would think it would leave, it wouldn't leave tracks like this. This looks like a tank or some kind of vehicle tracks. And if you could see the original photograph, it goes down into the crater. So this thing didn't just roll off, it came rolling up and then it rolled back down. I don't think that that's just a rock or some natural object. And then what about these tracks right here? There's another little round object that's leaving tracks running along on the moon. So there's stuff going on the moon that we're not being told about. And of course, then when the moon eclipses the sun, by the way, that's called an occultation. And that's why my new book is Our Occulted History. The very first sentence says, let's get this straight, book is not about vampires or zombies or devil worship, this, you know, the usual occult. This is used in the astronomical sense that when one body masks or hides another, that's called an occultation. So what my book actually means is our hidden history, what's been hidden from us. And when the moon occults the sun, it's just at the right distance to completely cover the corona of the sun. Now, you know, how does that happen naturally? Now, I'm not about to say that maybe in some kind of weird cosmic coincidence that couldn't happen, but what are the odds? And then you stack it against all the other anomalies I just got through showing you, and you should begin to figure out there's something going on here. There's even claims that there are pyramids on the moon, and pyramids, on Mars. And interestingly enough, the configuration of these pyramids from the Cydonia region on Mars pretty well match up with the configuration on the moon, which pretty well matches the configuration of the pyramids on the Giza Plateau. Now, is that just sheer coincidence, or is this tantalizing evidence that there was pre-civilizations, intelligent beings occupying our solar system before we came along?